There is a specific kind of silence that fills a room when a lie is being told. It is heavy, suffocating, and smells faintly of stale desperation. I sat behind the mahogany desk that has anchored my study for 40 years, the leather of my chair creaking under my weight. The air in the room was thick with the scent of old paper, lemon polish, and the 30-year-old single malt scotch sitting in the crystal decanter to my right. A drink I hadn't touched in a decade, but kept around to remind myself of the days when I had the constitution to burn. I am Edward. I am 75 years old. But beneath the thin, papery skin, the bone is still there. These hands used to haul 50-pound bales of raw cotton. These hands fixed the gears of industrial looms when the mechanics were on strike. These hands built sterling textiles from a damp basement in Jersey into an empire that clothed half the eastern seaboard. Now, these hands were holding a checkbook. Across from me sat Jason, my grandson, my only living heir. He was 24, handsome in that polished, artificial way that comes from never having done a day of manual labor in his life. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first 3 cars combined, a bespoke navy wool that hugged his shoulders too tightly. He sat on the edge of the guest chair, his knees bouncing with a nervous energy that he was trying desperately to pass off as entrepreneurial zeal. "It's just a bridge, Grandpa," Jason said, leaning forward. His eyes were wide, glistening with a moisture that looked suspiciously practiced. "The investors, they got spooked by the market correction." I looked at him. I looked at the gold watch on his wrist, a heavy, ostentatious thing that ticked away seconds he hadn't earned. "Investors," I repeated, testing the word. It tasted like ash. "For the lifestyle brand." "It's an experiential platform," he corrected quickly, a flash of irritation crossing his face before he smoothed it back into a mask of pleading. "We curate luxury moments. It's the future, Grandpa. You always told me to look to the future." "I told you to build something that lasts," I said, my voice rasping slightly. "I built warmth. I built durability. You are building—" He stood up, pacing the small rug in front of my desk. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "It's a network. It's influence. But if I don't cover the bridge loan by Friday, by tomorrow, they seize the IP. They seize the assets. My reputation will be torched." He stopped pacing and turned to me. He dropped to his knees, literally kneeling on the Persian rug. It was a theatrical gesture that made my stomach turn. "Grandpa, please," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm drowning. I just need a lifeline. It's 40,000, maybe 50 to cover the vigorish on the short-term note." I looked at him. I saw the sweat beading on his forehead. I smelled the expensive cologne masking the scent of fear. My private investigator had given me the file 3 days ago. It was a shell company used to funnel money into high-stakes poker games and influencer trips to Tulum and Dubai. They weren't venture capitalists and fleece vests. They were bookies in the back rooms of illegal casinos and high-end dealers who sold powders by the gram. He wasn't building a business. He was digging a grave. But as I looked at him, searching his face for any trace of my daughter, any trace of myself, I felt a terrible, aching question gnawing at my heart. Was there anything left? Was there any honor buried under the layers of greed and entitlement? Was he just a scared boy who had made a mistake, or was he a predator waiting for the old lion to die? I needed to know. I needed to be certain before I made the final decision about the trust. "Sit down, Jason," I said quietly. He scrambled back into the chair, wiping his eyes. I opened the top drawer of my desk. I reached past the reading glasses and the letter opener. I pulled out the sleek black checkbook. It was the personal ledger for my primary liquid asset account. I opened it. The sound of the check tearing from the binding was loud, a ripping noise that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. I picked up my fountain pen. I unscrewed the cap. I watched the blue ink flow as I signed my name at the bottom line. Edward J. Sterling. The signature was shaky but legible. It was a signature that had authorized factory constructions, payrolls for thousands, and charitable wings at hospitals. I left the pay to the order of line blank. I left the amount line blank. I slid the check across the mahogany desk. It hissed against the wood, coming to rest inches from his manicured fingers. Jason stared at it. He blinked, confused. "I trust you, Jason," I lied. The words felt heavy and jagged in my throat. "I don't know the exact figure of your debt. I don't know what the interest is or what fees these investors." He reached for it, his hand hovering, trembling. "Listen to me," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming the steel that had forged an industry. "This account is everything. It is my retirement. It is my medical fund for when the end comes." I locked eyes with him. "Fill it out for what you need to survive. Cover the debt. Not a penny more. Do not bleed me dry, boy. If you take more than you need, you are taking the oxygen out of my lungs." Jason grabbed the check. He held it in both hands like a holy relic. For a split second, I saw it. I saw the hunger flare in his eyes, raw, ugly, and bottomless. It was the look of a starving wolf spotting a wounded deer. It terrified me. Then, just as quickly, the mask slammed back down. He looked up at me with wide, grateful eyes. "Grandpa, thank you," he stammered. "I won't let you down. It's just 40,000, maybe 50 to be safe, I promise." He stood up and came around the desk. He hugged me. His arms felt strong, but the embrace was hollow. He smelled of deceit and opportunity. "You saved my life," he whispered. "Just fix it, Jason," I said, patting his back weakly. I watched him walk out the door, clutching that check like a winning lottery ticket. He didn't look back. He didn't ask about my health. He didn't ask why I was sitting in the dark in the middle of the afternoon. He just walked out, fast, his step light and bouncy. I swiveled my chair toward the window, looking out at the overgrown garden. The rain had started to fall, gray and relentless. I wanted to be wrong. God, I wanted to be wrong. I prayed to a God I hadn't spoken to in years, since my Martha passed, that he would prove me paranoid. I prayed that he would write 40,000 on that line and bring me the receipt. But if you've ever looked at your own bloodline and realized you raised a wolf, if you've ever felt the cold chill of knowing that the people who should protect you are the ones sizing you up for the slaughter, hit that subscribe button. Because what he wrote on that check wasn't a lifeline, it was a death sentence for my dignity. And I was about to find out exactly how much my life was worth to him. The waiting began. I didn't leave the study. I didn't eat dinner. Mrs. Higgins, my housekeeper, brought a tray of soup at 6, but I waved it away. I couldn't swallow. My throat was constricted by a lump of anxiety that felt like a stone. I sat in front of my computer monitor. The screen glowed with the blue light of the private banking portal. I had linked that specific checkbook to a secondary account, not my retirement, as I had told him, but a liquid asset holding I had consolidated specifically for this trap. It held the proceeds from the sale of the factory in Lowell. It was a substantial sum, enough to tempt a saint, enough to damn a sinner. I refreshed the page. 0. I refreshed it again at midnight. No change. I didn't sleep. I sat in the leather chair, wrapped in a blanket, watching the digital clock on the taskbar tick away the minutes of my life. 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. My mind played tricks on me. I imagined him staring at the check, pen in hand, wrestling with his conscience. I imagined him writing 50,000 and feeling relief. I imagined him tearing it up and deciding to face his problems like a man. I was a fool. Old men are sentimental fools. Thursday passed in a blur of caffeine and dread. I refreshed the page every hour. Still nothing. He was waiting. He was savoring it. Or maybe he was finding a bank that wouldn't ask questions about a six-figure withdrawal. Friday morning arrived. The sun was pale and watery. At 9 a.m., the banks opened. I sat forward, my eyes burning, my hand gripping the mouse so hard my knuckles turned white. 9:30 a.m., nothing. 9:45 a.m., nothing. 10:03. The notification pinged, a soft digital chime that sounded like a bell tolling. Pending transaction. I clicked the details. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, irregular rhythm that hurt physically. "Please, Jason," I whispered to the empty room. "Please let it be 50. Let it be 60. Take 100. I don't care. Just leave me something. Show me you have a soul." I looked at the number. The breath left my body in a sharp, painful hiss. It wasn't 50,000. It wasn't 100,000. Zero. The entire balance, every single cent, down to the decimal. He hadn't just taken what he needed. He hadn't just padded the numbers to cover his interest. He had checked the balance somehow. Maybe he had a friend at the branch, maybe he guessed, and he had cleaned me out. He tried to leave me with zero. He tried to bankrupt his own grandfather. He tried to wipe out the medical fund I had told him about. He didn't care if I couldn't pay for a hospital bed. He didn't care if I starved. He saw a number and he took it all. The betrayal wasn't emotional anymore. It was physical. It felt like a serrated blade sliding between my ribs, twisting slowly. I stared at the screen, the blue light washing over my face, illuminating the tears that finally spilled over. He wasn't my grandson. He was a parasite. He had looked me in the eye, hugged me, and then walked into a bank and tried to erase my existence to fund his parties. I didn't wipe the tears away. I let them fall. They were the last tears I would ever shed for Jason Sterling. The sadness began to evaporate, boiling off into a steam of cold, hard resolve. It was the same resolve that had allowed me to crush competitors in the 80s, the same resolve that had kept the mills running during the recession. I was not a victim. I was Edward Sterling, and I had prepared for this. I reached for the phone. My hand was steady now. The tremor was gone. I dialed the number of Mr. Henderson, my personal banker of 30 years, who had been on standby for 48 hours. Henderson's voice was tense. "It happened," I whispered. My voice was dry, like dead leaves. Henderson asked. "All of it," I said. "Every dime." There was a silence on the line. Even Henderson, who dealt with the avarice of the wealthy every day, was shocked. "My God, Edward, Don't be," I said. "He made his choice." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Jason thought he had won. He thought the money was his. He was probably popping champagne right now, laughing at the stupid old man who signed a blank check. He didn't know that a blank check is also a contract of character, and he just breached it. "Initiate Protocol 0, I commanded. "Understood," said, freezing the asset transfer, flagging the account. "Yes," I said. I hung up the phone. I looked at the picture of Jason on my desk, taken when he was 5 years old, holding a fish he had caught. I picked up the frame. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I dropped it into the wastebasket. Glass shattered. The check was about to bounce, and so was his life. There is a particular frequency to the sound of unearned money being spent. It is a shrill, manic vibration that rattles the teeth and insults the soul. I stood in the chrome and glass elevator of the Elysium Tower in downtown Los Angeles, my hand resting heavily on the handle of a cane I didn't truly need but carried as a prop for the theater I was about to conduct. The bass from the penthouse floor above was vibrating through the soles of my shoes, a rhythmic thumping that sounded like the heartbeat of a creature that was running until its heart exploded. I checked my reflection in the polished steel doors. I was wearing my tuxedo from 1985, the one I had worn to my daughter's wedding. It was midnight blue, double-breasted, cut by a tailor in London who had been dead for 20 years. It smelled of cedar and memories. It hung a little looser on my frame than it used to, but the structure remained. That was the difference between me and the boy upstairs. I was built on structure. He was built on facade. The elevator chimed. The door slid open. The noise hit me like a physical wave. It was a wall of synthetic beats, shrieking laughter, and the pop of corks. The penthouse was a sprawling cavern of excess, rented for the night at a price that could have fed a family for a year. There were ice sculptures melting in the heat of 300 bodies. There were towers of champagne glasses stacked precariously on glass tables. There were people, children really, draped over expensive furniture, taking photos of themselves, desperate to prove they existed in proximity to wealth. I stepped out onto the marble floor. I shuffled. I let my shoulders slump. I became the frail, confused grandfather, the relic of a bygone era who had just unwittingly financed this debauchery. No one stopped me. No one asked for an invitation. I was invisible to them, a ghost in a tuxedo, until I walked into the main atrium. Jason was there. He was standing on a velvet ottoman, a bottle of Dom Perignon in one hand, a microphone in the other. He looked like a king. His face was flushed with adrenaline and alcohol, his eyes wide and bright with the manic energy of a gambler who thinks he has beaten the house. He was wearing a white dinner jacket that looked cheap under the strobe lights. "Hey!" he screamed into the mic, his voice cracking. "To Sterling Media!" The crowd roared. They didn't know what Sterling Media was. They didn't care. They just knew the drinks were free and the view was expensive. I walked toward him. The crowd parted, not out of respect, but out of confusion. They saw an old man with a cane and didn't know how to categorize me. Was I a prop? A joke? A donor? Jason saw me. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. I saw the terror flare in his eyes, the primal fear of the criminal seeing the victim at the scene of the crime. He froze, the bottle lowered halfway to his lips. He looked at me, then at the door, calculating if I had come with police or if I had come to be thanked. Then the arrogance took over. The greed that had rewritten his DNA surged back. He grinned, a wide, shark-like expression that showed too many teeth. He jumped down from the ottoman, landing with a heavy thud, and threw his arms wide. "Raina!" he shouted, his voice amplified by the speakers. "Look who it is! Everyone, kill the music!" The DJ, a kid with neon hair, cut the track. The silence that rushed into the room was ringing and uncomfortable. Jason yelled, throwing an arm around my shoulders. He smelled of sweat and expensive vodka. "The legend, Edward Sterling!" The crowd cheered. They raised their glasses to me. They weren't cheering for Edward, the man who built mills. They were cheering for Edward, the ATM. Jason leaned in close to hug me. To the room, it looked like an embrace of familial love. To me, it felt like a shakedown. He pressed his mouth to my ear, his breath hot and wet. "I told you I'd turn it around," he whispered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Business is booming, old man. The check cleared." I stood rigid in his embrace. I felt the vibration of his laughter against my chest. He thought he had won. He thought the money in his account was real. He thought the banking system moved faster than I did. "I'm sure it is," I said quietly, my voice barely audible over the murmurs of the crowd. He pulled back, keeping his hands on my shoulders, looking me in the eye with a mock tenderness that made me want to strike him. "You should go home, Grandpa. This party is a little lively for you. Go rest." He winked. He actually winked at me. "I didn't come to stay, Jason," I said. He laughed, a loud barking sound. "It's done, Edward. It's processed. The money is in the offshore wire." The timing of the universe is rarely perfect, but tonight, God was a structural engineer. A sound cut through the room. Bzzzt, bzzzt. It was Jason's phone, sitting on the glass table next to the champagne bucket. It vibrated against the glass, a harsh, demanding sound. Then it buzzed again, and again, a frantic staccato rhythm of notifications. Jason frowned. He looked at me, then at the phone. He laughed nervously. Probably the investors. He picked up the phone. I watched his face. I watched the blood drain out of it, starting at his forehead and washing down to his neck, leaving him the color of old parchment. "Ugh," he whispered. I knew exactly what he was saying. I had designed the notification myself with Mr. Henderson. Alert, transaction failed. Alert, insufficient funds. Alert, account frozen, suspicious activity. Alert, wire transfer blocked. He swiped the screen frantically, his fingers trembling. He opened his banking app. He choked out. It said pending. It said pending, I corrected him, my voice projecting clearly in the silent room. That's the float, Jason. That's the bank trusting you because of my name. He looked up at me, his eyes wild, the whites showing all around the irises. "Where is it?" "It was there," I said calmly, "until 10:05 this morning, 5 minutes after you deposited the check. I initiated Protocol 0, I said. I liquidated the account. I transferred the assets to a secure trust you can't touch." But I spent it," he whispered, the horror dawning on him. "I wired the deposit for this place. I wired the crypto exchange." "I know," I said. "You wrote checks against a closed account. You tried to wire $2.8 million that didn't exist." He shook his head, mute. "They call it bank fraud," I said, "and because you tried to wire it internationally." The glass dropped from his hand. It shattered on the marble floor, champagne splashing onto his expensive shoes. "Ah!" he screamed, backing away from me. "You trapped me!" I roared, my voice finally breaking the tether of my restraint. I slammed my cane onto the floor, the crack echoing like thunder. "I gave you a choice. You could have written 50,000. You could have saved yourself. I would have honored it." The guests were backing away. Phones were out. The influencers were live streaming the downfall of the king. I shouted, stepping toward him. "You wanted everything. You tried to bleed me dry. You tried to steal my legacy to buy—" I gestured around the room, at the waste, the excess, the hollow friends. "Grandpa, please," he sobbed, tears streaming down his face, ruining his spray tan. "Fix it. Call the bank. Tell them it was a mistake." "I authorized a lifeline," I said, looking him dead in the eye. The elevator doors chimed behind me. Jason looked past my shoulder. His knees buckled. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. I had timed the call to the FBI field office perfectly. A voice boomed. 4 agents and windbreakers moved into the room. They weren't the local beat cops. These were men who chased numbers across borders. They moved with efficiency. Jason shrieked, "No, wait! It's a misunderstanding! My grandfather, he's confused!" He pointed at me, his finger shaking. "Tell them!" I looked at the lead agent. He stopped next to me, looking down at the sobbing boy in the white dinner jacket. "Mr. Sterling," the agent said to me. I looked at Jason. I looked for the boy I used to take fishing. I looked for the toddler who used to fall asleep on my chest. I couldn't find him. I only saw a stranger who had tried to cannibalize my life. "Attempted theft by deception," I said clearly. elder financial abuse, wire fraud. Jason screamed as they grabbed him. "I'm family!" "You stopped being family when you filled in that line," I said softly. They handcuffed him. The click of the metal was the most satisfying sound I had heard in years. They dragged him toward the elevator. He was kicking, screaming, snot running down his face, begging the friends who were currently filming him to help. None of them moved. They watched him with the detached curiosity of people watching a car crash. I didn't look away. I watched him until the elevator doors slid shut, cutting off his screams. The room was silent. The bass was gone. The party was dead. I looked around at the crowd. 300 strangers in expensive clothes, holding drinks I had paid for with my dignity. I walked to the champagne tower. I gripped the tablecloth with my trembling hand, not from weakness, but from adrenaline. I pulled. The tower crashed down. 300 glasses shattered in a cascade of crystal and noise. The sound was cleansing. It sounded like a fever breaking. "Party's over," I announced into the stunned silence. They ran. They scrambled for the exits like rats fleeing a sinking ship, leaving their half-finished drinks and their dignity behind. 10 minutes later, the penthouse was empty. I stood alone on the balcony, the wind whipping the lapels of my tuxedo. Below me, the city of Los Angeles sprawled out like a grid of diamonds. The sirens were fading in the distance, taking my mistake away. My phone rang. I pulled it from my pocket. It wasn't the bank. It wasn't the lawyers. Emily, the caller ID read. My granddaughter, Jason's cousin. The girl who taught 3rd grade in a public school in Oakland. The girl who drove a 10-year-old Honda and sent me handwritten cards on my birthday. I hadn't spoken to her in months, ashamed of how much attention I had given Jason while ignoring her quiet decency. I answered. "Emily," her voice was small, worried. I saw something online. Someone was live streaming. Is it true?" "He's gone, Emily," I said. My voice was tired, but the weight was gone from my chest. They asked immediately, "Did he hurt you?" She didn't ask about the money. She didn't ask about the scandal. She asked if I was okay. I closed my eyes, letting the wind cool my face. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, feeling the first true peace I had felt since Martha died. "I don't understand," she said. "You don't need to," I said. I looked out at the city lights. "Emily, how are your students?" "Yes," she said, confused. I asked. "I have considerable liquid assets that need a new home." There was a silence on the line, then the sound of a soft gasp. "Dead serious," I said. "I'm done investing in the past." I hung up the phone. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the checkbook. It felt light now. It felt like a tool, not a weapon. The balance was safe. The legacy was safe. And the wolf was in a cage. I turned my back on the view and walked toward the elevator. I didn't need the cane. I hooked it over my arm and walked with the stride of a man who had just rebuilt his empire from the ashes.